Welcome to the 7 Facets of Awakened Wholeness. I'm Layman Pascal, and this is a special co-production from the Integral Stage and Pacific Integral. It is a series of conversations meant to highlight and explore the Awakened Wholeness project that's being offered, evoked, invoked, and allowed into being by Abigail Lynam and Geoff Fitch from Pacific Integral with special support from Tucker Walsh. Episode by episode, we'll be going deeply and playfully and hopefully intelligently into the 7 interwoven principles of awakened wholeness. And these discussions will be released over the next 8 months in tandem with articles, short films, and free workshops that are coupled specifically to each aspect of the transformational homecoming work that is the special care of today's guests. This is the first conversation, and as such, we'll be doing a collaborative overview of the entire sequence, the general insights and energies that are involved, and the inception of this special event, getting a lay of the land with laymen, so to speak. I have a great deal of love and respect for both Abigail and Geoff as human beings and as authentic spiritual agents who have deeply tasted the unfolding edge of the transcendental heart as it lives in the eternal moment and in the strange, delicious, painful peculiarities of this unique historical moment. So I'm very happy to see them. Welcome, Geoff and Abigail.
Thank you, Lehman.
How's that? Pretty good introduction.
Yeah, that was
I
great.
feel thrilled and delighted already. Thanks so
Yeah,
much.
yeah, love it, love it.
Okay. First question is, why now? Why is it time to clarify and present the ground of your work in this way at this time?
Want me to take a stab at that?
Please.
Well, I think that, the question why is always a funny one. So I'll just start with that. It's uh, I usually just dismiss any why questions as leading nowhere. So with that proviso, I'll forge on. I think one of the reasons just in our own work is a kind of constant um, inquiry, reflection back on itself, self-discovery, refinement. So we've gone through waves of articulating what we're up to and expressing it into the world. And I think so at this time, we've been through, I would say we've been through kind of a, a, a passage over the past several years, which takes a kind of deeply integrative orientation. And this work of looking at the work again and looking at it is a kind of differentiation. It's looking at it through these 7 dimensions. And so in a way, it's kind of stepping back and refining how we're holding it. So that's a kind of more internal why, you could say. Um, and, to me, and you mentioned this kind of strange historical moment that we're in, it's always been a deep intention of ours since the very beginning, even though the way we might describe that intention has been to serve the unfolding in this moment, to serve our becoming as human beings, to meet now we might say, the challenges of the meta crisis. So, listen, whatever each of us are doing in that kind of orientation is important. So I would just include ourselves in the work to do that.
Is there anything you would add to that, Abigail?
Yeah, I think I will. Geoff kind of alluded to this, but the work that we're engaging in is always evolving, and I joined this conversation as somebody who helps to host and facilitate our work, but I also was a participant of it, and so I come from both angles, and something that amazes me is actually how much it is always evolving and almost to the point, if it's okay to say, like, we're catching up to what it is we're up to, and seeing it fresh and seeing it more deeply. And so, this sort of the articulation of the 7 facets model and our exploration of it is something that I could just say I feel like I'm apprenticing myself to. I'm learning from as we engage with it and unfold it.
Hmm. So the heart of this work, as I understand it, is a way of bringing together 2 principles of awakening and wholeness in 7 particular areas or styles. These two principles are often felt by people as opposites. On the one hand, this principle of seeing through the world, deconstructing identity, letting go of the conventional structures of the human personality at more and more basic layers until we're transparent to something that the word consciousness reminds us of. And on the other hand, a principle of embracing the whole character, really living from and as the full spectrum richness of a unique human being in a real world. Are we disidentifying or are we fully identifying? So the query here is something like, are these just two kinds of practices that you're placing in juxtaposition with each other? Or are they more fundamentally blended? Are these basically two aspects of the same process somehow?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot in your question. Um, I'll start with that one. And I would say, like, one of the ways we talk about this is we draw on the sort of Tibetan framework of ground, path, and fruition. So awakened wholeness refers to a kind of orientation to practice. So it's kind of embedded in your question, but it also refers to the prior wholeness, the prior awakenedness that is always already here as the ground of the work. So it's both a kind of space from which we hold the work, but also a principle that says, when we're engaging in something developmental, we don't want to unnecessarily, put what we're moving towards at a distance, and when it's actually closer to home. And so there's in a real way, this is a view, it's a ground in which we hold the work. But also you're pointing to those two sides of that coin of awakening, the transcendent and immanent. And they're the answer to that question for me is yes, to not either or, that they're both distinct practices that serve um, that are served by discerning them with clarity, and also they're just arbitrary ways that we divide the mystery. So they're integrated too. And as you can see, like, one of the things that I would say for myself, and as the flavor of our work, is we're talking about, we're bringing this framework, these terms, these distinctions, and we're always kind of embracing them with care, but also kind of troubling them, as Bayo Kamalafe says, letting them kind of spill out onto the floor and make a mess. And this is what I hear in your thinking too, Layman. So it's a good question and a fuzzy answer, which is kind of the relational way to be in it, is to not like fully answer any of these questions, but actually be in them vulnerably.
I want it to be implied that you're both being inquired into with each of these questions, whether that's a Geoff speaks then Abigail speaks thing, or Abigail goes first. But I don't want to have to say, and what about you, Abigail, at the end of each question. But I do want you to feel like you are also being asked each question, even if Geoff also answers it.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm also just holding and recognizing that we're in a conversation, and so it'll flow in various ways. And yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think, Layman?
Well, thanks for specifically addressing me, Geoff. I appreciate that. I feel like the phenomenological cosmos contains a particular flavor that can only be described by the conjunction of these two principles. But I think that's fundamentally a distinct flavor of its own, and that it doesn't depend. It's not We're not making it by putting these principles together. We're trying to describe it by taking these two terms apart.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's important. It's like yeah. I mean, it's like, in a sense, a difference in unity. It's like it's important to take things apart. But because that helps clarify.
Yeah. Because there is an interesting element here, which is, some people tell a story that spirituality is evolving over the course of history. And that's a very interesting and compelling and cool futuristic story where maybe the flavors we're starting to prioritize now are either novel or we're calling them up for some special reason that pertains to this moment of history. And other people like to tell a story of, no, these are the fundamental ultimate principles that have always been engaged by esoteric human spiritual and existential practice. And I have very mixed feelings on that because I sort of imagine myself in the role of archaic spiritual practitioner. They're like, well, I would be working on this same thing back then. It's the thing that I love. But there's just no way to tell how new it might really be, how distinct. How do you guys relate to uh, the possibility that spirit itself is evolving and changing?
Yeah, what occurs to me is, can we ever know, in a way? And so maybe it doesn't matter so much, but at the same time, all we can know is, what we know from this vantage point in this time. And so yeah, so in a way, I think just even the notion of spirit itself evolving is a it's a juicy exploration that for me doesn't have a particular answer. And yet, it does feel like, we're living in very particular times with particular pressures, particular evocations. And so to imagine that somehow, a spirit is evolving and expressing itself through us and through these times also seems to be true. So yeah, I think I'm probably inadequate to the question, but I enjoy sitting in it as an inquiry. Mm.
Mm. No, I love that. How could we know? So maybe it doesn't matter. Um, Lehman, for me, I'm always conscious that these kind of questions arise in a, like in an understanding, there's a particular understanding or particular experience that, like from the integral model, you could say like, these questions are about the reality are arising as both an expression of our own view, of our own, we're kind of bringing forth the answer to the question and the world that conforms with the answer simultaneously. And so I think a simple way to say what I just said is, that we can look at reality in many, many different ways. And it's kind of like putting on one of your pairs of sunglasses, one of your weird sunglasses that you have, to look at it from that perspective. So, we can look at the perspective that spirit is evolving and see it evolving. And that's a beautiful thing, and all of those perspectives obscure things, if you merely look at it through that lens and you start to, you know, then then you miss the other example, which is like you can go back in hundreds of years and find amazingly rich cultures that, you know, cultural aspects that we would certainly want to have more present today that we don't have today. And so, yeah, so it's I hate to be annoying about this, but every view that we take is kind of obscuring something too. And part of the essence of our work and the wholeness aspect of it is being in that space of actually being in relationship to both what we see, what we don't see, what's present, what's not present. Um, and maybe that sounds a little complex, but the experience of it is that arriving home, because in a deep sense, like we are that complex mandala, and when we make space for it, we can relax.
Viewers and
So
listeners should know that my sunglasses are not that weird.
No, they're not. They're not. They're lovely. Every one of them.
There's something in what you just said, Geoff, that's interesting relative to this whole project of awakening wholeness.
Yeah.
And I guess I want to ask something like, what does it take to skillfully let go of all models and systems while also allowing yourselves to be impressed enough and convinced enough by your own model that it can move you to perform helpful action and teachings in the world?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Hmm. It's a good question. The immediate answer that came to mind was repeatedly making mistakes. Like this is somebody asked me, I'm working with somebody who is a really brilliant young person and was asking me like, how do you support people? How do you learn to have skillful means in supporting people's development? And I kind of gave that type of answer, repeatedly, like finding what works and what doesn't work. And the framework, that we're talking about in these 7 aspects is a form of integral development. And we have always theorized and thought about what we do. And what's really helpful that is like something that you said, which is the kind of discernment aspect of it, which is you taking perspectives that help refine how we see different parts of what we're doing, right? Which is, for example, if you're looking at growing complexity, the realm of development and awakening, seeing where's the boundary between these two, clearly, so that we, support different aspects of our development. Um, but it's important not to let all of that go, but you could say hold it lightly, just to understand that these are all in a way empty, also empty. This is the awakening side. These are empty boundaries that we place on something that's more mysterious. So we have to have a lightness to it and an openness to it and a sense of humor about it, and also just to understand our own, you know, um, epistemological humility. We're always learning. You know,
Mm.
can't get too tied to your ideas.
Yeah, I appreciate what you shared, Geoff. And what occurs to me is I'm just thinking about like earlier in our work that there were particular frameworks that we are drawing on, more often than perhaps, or more, they were more central perhaps than they are now. And they were, there was so much utility and liberation in them, and as can be true with anything that we value, we can have it and work with it, but it can also have us. It can start to feel a little bit constraining, and that it's obscuring more than it's revealing. And so just that process of kind of letting something dissolve and reform is, feels really fundamental. And I think for me, like the principle that I just keep coming back to, and I don't even know if it's a principle, maybe it's just more of a like an orientation or a leaning, is towards the intimacy, the kind of vulnerability and truthfulness of a moment. And, in those moments, the models are informing and, perhaps pointing to something, but they're also in the background. They're just not the thing that's, that matters most. And yet that's an iterative movement between, being immediate and present, and then, sort of stepping back and looking. Yeah, so both. And I think about with this particular framework, it really arose out of the work rather than, it was the thing that kind of created the work in the first place. So a little bit of a sort of living the practice, a kind of ground up.
Hmm. Two
Yeah, I
great
mean,
answers.
yeah, thanks. All right. We got two of us on base. You're up to
Yep.
bat.
Yep. Mark that down
I,
on the scoreboard.
I think in part, like we're talking about, we're kind of floating around a step back from the framework that we're talking about how we see it, how we hold it, and it's really important. It's an important piece of it. It's like that. It's probably the piece that we wouldn't want to let go of. We replace, a lens on how we see the work. And this is the lens that we're putting out there is like really to me super useful and super important. But there's that kind of stepping back from how we hold any framework, which is really important, And I would say, I would just add to that, part of this has come from our own practice of kind of reflexivity, you could say, of actually using these practices on the work itself, which tends to, it tends to kind of create a transparency to what you're doing, and not undermine having like kind of a fixed position from which you're working. And also, there's just a simple ethical principle has to do with what Abigail, you said of actually being in relationship. And this is a deep part of our work is that it's relational and it's a process oriented. So we're in this space of unfolding with each other. And if you come into relationship, you pretty quickly find that your concepts about each other are in the way of that. And they're not, they're important, but they're also, they're, the sense that the three of us like know each other. Oh, I know who Lehman is. I know who Abigail is, and not that we're coming to know each other is is something that as we go deeper into a relationship we let go of, and that comes back. So now that turns back reflexivity. That turns back on all of the theories and ideas that we have about the work, and says that, well, that's maybe like fog on the sunglasses that we need to see through. Yeah. A simpler way to put it is like when you meet another person, let go of your ideas of them and see what happens.
What's the most beautiful thing about human beings?
Hmm, what a beautiful question. Maybe it's with some of what I spoke to before, but I've just struck in this moment by just the beauty of the light on your face, Layman, and just the preciousness of what it means to kind of lean in and have contact with one another and explore something that's so close to our own heart and practice. So there's something beautiful about I guess it would be capacity to meet one another and the capacity to keep learning, to keep kind of seeing anew, to in a sense hopefully recreate ourselves as we learn.
To me, I don't know about thing, but to me, the yeah, the beauty is revealed in intimacy and actually our own vulnerability with each other, our own coming to know each other, and and then there's just an innate beauty there. Never seen that fail. We actually, in those moments where you actually come to know.
So let's move into doing a first pass on all the seven facets of awakening wholeness. And then maybe after that, we'll address some hard questions.
Okay.
Uh, but before we do that, what do they all have in common? What unifies all these seven unfolding facets?
Um, well, one of the things that as we talk about them, there's ones that appear to be more individual, or that we might, imagine as being more individual, and some of them as more collective. But one of the things that I think, that's been an inquiry of ours that unifies all of these different facets is that they're both individual and collective, that there's something that we can see through both of those lenses, and that there's that they um, that they move through a kind of unfolding process that uh, that is not necessarily linear, and that they're all, this is not something they have in common, but I guess you could say it is, but they're all interrelated in important ways. What do you think, Abigail?
Was your question what unifies them? Did you say,
What
or
do they
what's
have?
common?
What's common?
What's common? Yeah, I mean, it's already been spoken, but we talked about the ground, the path, and fruition. So the ground of awakened wholeness, that, that is, fundamentally what's most deeply common. And that ultimately, there is a path, there's a practice, there's a way of engaging with each of these territories, and they bring us back home to, who we already are, and perhaps are waking up to, or recovering what's been lost. So that's the deepest commonality.
So I noticed on the website that the seven are listed there in alphabetical order: awakening, collective, complexity, embodiment, integration, intimacy and relationship, and soul expression. But I've also noticed watching some interviews that that's not necessarily the order that you two say them in, and that the schedule I was given by Tucker is to address them as integration, complexity, intimacy, awakening, embodiment, soul expression, and collective. Does the order matter?
Not really. I mean, it's it doesn't matter in a practical sense. Like, this is all, the only thing that really matters is what serves people. And I would never like say to somebody like, well, you got to start with this. And then, that's not what about, these are dimensions of our wholeness. So, um, what often matters for an individual is particular parts of these dimensions at a particular point in time, and maybe in socially as well. There are things that matter. And so, but we talked about them in different directions, but the order of the workshop series and the order of the event over the next few months is a specific order. And it kind of follows a descent and an ascent. So it might be a way of also in it mirroring that kind of rhythm of a transformative process.
Well, let's go through these seven, and
Okay.
I'll ask one quick question about each facet so people can get a taste of what might be coming up when we do deep dives into each of them. We can start with integration, which is a word that is used to suggest the welcoming and inclusion of all the aspects of ourselves, all our forms of experience and sense making, including our shadows and wounds, which might become our unique gifts if we include them deeply enough. But often people know about parts of ourselves and even repeatedly go through moments in which we feel informed by and committed to including those parts, but it doesn't always lead to real change or to a robust role for those parts in our lives. What is it that determines whether a seemingly included part really gets integrated into our lives?
I'll speak to that, or just get us started. But to me, I'll refer to my own journey, because I can sort of see the process of this more at play. It feels like the significant shift is when I can deeply or truly honor that part of myself as holding its own wisdom essence, or for the wisdom that it endeavors to bring into the world. So when I cultivate a positive relationship to it. So I think about, I can think about a couple of these realms. One is anger. As somebody who earlier in life couldn't locate anger in myself and had the experience of growing up with a father who expressed an abundance of it, and obviously those two are directly related. It's encountering the anger that was here that I projected out onto others. Is a first step, and I could say in a sense almost like a frightening step. It's like, wow, that's me. I have that in me. And then finding ways of helping it to move and unfold and express itself to discover the aliveness that was embedded in that unexpressed anger, and ultimately to cultivate again a kind of respectful, healthy relationship to that very phenomena, to know that it's fundamental to the range of human existence. So perhaps that's an example of I think versus something that I'm struggling with that I really still want to go away is the very thing that is going to keep showing itself to me, and oftentimes not in its healthy expression, but more in a kind of sideways kind of a way.
I would just add, well, let me ask you, Lehman, is there more to your question?
There's nothing I need to add. There's something very beautiful and I think very practical about the shift into honoring and treating positively these parts of ourselves. I feel like that in some ways answers the whole question, but what would
Yeah,
you add to that,
yeah,
Geoff?
yeah. Good. I just wanted to check in with that. If we look at integration, and part of this is integration also includes its opposite, which is differentiation. So, so there's a, so it's, there's a move to integrate, but also as we embody in our own uniqueness to differentiate from parts of ourselves too. That's the work of working with introjection. But also the thing that I want to add is this also happens at a collective level.
Mm.
So if we think like I have these parts of myself that are integrating, now there's three of us. So there's three groups of parts of ourselves here. And how do they integrate with each other? And when we come into collectives, we can we can kind of fall into roles and patterns, and the collective can suppress parts and not welcome those parts, and things can kind of get stuck in different collective defense structures. So the same process happens in our collective space where we open up the diversity of energies and experiences that are in the collective space and allow them to be more free and fluid by welcoming them.
So the next facet that I think we're going to address in this series is complexity, which is
Yeah.
different from being just complicated. Complexity seems to feed on nuances. It seems to thrive in the spaces between apparent opposites. Just in a very kind of simple, direct way, what are some of your favorite examples of complexity?
Well, this facet has to do with, so if we just kind of building on the conversation that we were just talking about welcoming different parts, you know, there's another thing that can happen in that, right? Which is to grow an ability to hold a kind of transcendent view or attitude or understanding of those two parts. So now you have like like two atoms and a molecule. So I might see like I have anger and I have compassion, but then there's a kind of view that's like, well, what holds both of those? So the work of complexity is um, is in a way all of these different facets are working with different forms of alienation, you could say, or different forms of separateness. And this growing uh, developmental complexity has us actually begin to see the world in a way that has these parts not just welcomed, but actually fit into a larger view. And you can, to me, this is really important in our world right now because we have like structures in our society and our culture that are fostering division and polarization and separateness and saying these two things don't belong together. One of them's right and one of them's wrong. And when we grow a more complex view of that, we say, oh, that, those two things aren't either right or wrong. They're actually kind of two sides of the same coin. And the experience of that isn't complicatedness, it's actually simplicity. So when our own complexity of consciousness grows to um, vibe with our experience, things become simpler. Right now, things seem very complicated in the world, and that's can be simplified by growing our capacity to hold all those parts and all of those relations. Now, that didn't quite answer your question, but maybe you have a good example, Abigail. I don't know. It's more
Or a
concrete.
response yourself, Layman.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting thing because in developmental communities, there's so much discussion about increasing levels of complexity.
Yeah.
And I appreciate what you're saying about the fact that that's a relative measure, that when you are complex enough to meet that complexity, it then seems simple to you. It's a very famous saying from Einstein about how you want to make things as simple as possible, but no simpler. But of course, what he means is general relativity theory.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. Well, and I would say like uh, this is an area of that is yeah there's some controversy around it and like different kind of critical perspectives on this aspect and that's a whole other conversation we can probably get into when we do the talk just on that facet but maybe it's also just resonating with the appropriate level of complexity for the context for the situation. So sometimes that might be, yeah, as simple as that as is needed, like and and I think, to me in real practical living, these degrees of, developmental structures are, you know, maybe following something closer to, Jeremy Johnson. They're more like structures than stages. There's there's different ways that we move through life, sometimes complex, sometimes simple. Um, it's more about like what's appropriate to the moment and having fluidity and flexibility and adapting to what's unfolding and to the world and what it's needed. And developing some range in this just gives us kind of um, more dynamic range to deal with different kinds of challenges that we face.
Maybe a piece I'll add to this is just around perspective taking, which is, within this capacity is increasing capacity to take and hold perspectives and multiple perspectives. And I think about like in the, the unfolding of a life when we meet another, let's say another, perhaps from a different cultural context, and we can't quite imagine what life is like from, inside of their view, then we can start to widen out and actually include that in part of our own capacities to sort of experience life, that is does it's not experienced as contradictory, and immediately even just saying that, it brings in the integration element that we were just talking about. But just thinking about there's a quote, I can't remember whose this is, but it's something like, "You're a part of myself that I haven't yet met." And so recognizing that as we encounter one another and experience the differences in the particularity, that if we can actually begin to include that in ourselves, it's there's a kind of widening and deepening of who we take ourselves to be, and then how we relate to one another in the world.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's also a great example of how these facets interconnect, like our growth and our complexity really really depends a lot on our own shadow work, on our own seeing projection, and seeing one within the other. So those two are very connected.
Well, let's move into the next interconnected facet, which is intimacy and relationship. We are wounded and healed in relationship. And in the current world, it seems like there's a tremendous starvation for intimacy, for friendship, for love, for the authenticity of being with each other. But when is it wise to be guarded and to protect ourselves from intimacy?
Mm.
You want me to take that?
You can begin.
Yeah. Um, this, I would say, Layman, in the evolution of our work, I would say that there's kind of a whole understanding of our work, which you could say it's kind of started with a kind of integral development orientation. It took on a deep appreciation of the awakening aspect, the awakened wholeness. And at another level, the real heart of our work is relationship. And uh, it's a pragmatic thing, but it's also a kind of a deep piece of the DNA of the work. And the pragmatic thing is like it's the of all these facets, it's the one that we have the most trouble with. That and you can see that in spiritual communities and developmental communities, and that there's um, that the real work of in a way, a lot of the work of sustaining this capacity in the world that we need is in this aspect, so that we can have healthy relationships that are clear, that are productive, that are fluid, that are open, that we can deal with conflict, that we can um, stay in relationship and also be differentiated. So that question that you ask about, when is it good to keep to yourself or to stay separate? I mean, this is what intimacy is. It's not um, it's not like removing uh, boundaries. It's actually being able to be both individual and connected at the same time. And the more that we can do that, the more that we actually can be in our separateness and our differentiation while being in relationship. So how that usually breaks down is we, to some degree, are enmeshed with each other. And as soon as you start to act like my father, the whole thing breaks down. Because I'm still working it out with him, and and the more we can actually be our own selves with each other and with our differences in full connection with each other, um, the deeper we go in intimacy and relationship. So the both of those are really important.
How was that, Layman? Did it respond to your question?
Yes, I think so. Is there anything you would add to um, this question of the relationship between division and fusion, and between the need to take vulnerable risk and the need also to take care for self-protection?
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in the moment, what comes in the way that you just articulated that is this, yeah, is the process of relationship and the kind of, as Geoff was referencing, the kind of diversity and unity, the differentiation, and the available for contact. So in the kind of unfolding of a relationship, if and when the difficulties arise, it sort of feel, again, I'm presencing this as a kind of felt sense in my own experience in the moment. Like, there might be that felt sense of the need to kind of pull in and pull back a little bit. to kind of hold, oneself perhaps with, for needs around safety or self-care or something like that, or even just self-inquiry. And then the possibility to kind of come back through that through a practice of truthfulness and vulnerability. I mean, so that's a ever unfolding, I guess you could say, or it's kind of a dialectical process. Yeah, and it strikes me, and this is again sort of more from the example perspective, like in my own family life, the deeper the differentiation as I've kind of, I don't know what you would say, grown and matured, the deeper availability for kind of a deeper relationship with one another and our whole family history. So yeah, just really seeing that at play.
I'm kind of what I would say is I'm touched by that the question in this facet comes up like, well, how do I take care of myself? Or, to me, it um, reflects the quality of this facet, and the vulnerability that's present in relationship there. And um, and this shows up in all of our work, it shows up in all of these different dimensions of, when I say our work, I mean collectively human work, that vulnerability that's there. Like, can I be here? Can I be myself? Can I be safe? Um, like our relational patterns, our model of self and other are really deep and shape how we see ourselves in the world. I remember, I don't know if I told you this story before, but years ago we had Rolly Stanich as a guest faculty. Doesn't matter what I told you a story. This is for a podcast for other people. I'll just repeat myself. Yeah. And he was doing his like this really cool presentation on the three faces of spirit, I, we, and it, and bringing his kind of integral Christianity to bear, and he had different U2 songs for each facet of spirit that he was playing, and he told the experience of having this kind of spontaneous realization of divine love, and he said in that moment, he said, like, I realized I was the beloved, and this like just pierced my heart. That after that was over, I went back to my room and I like sobbed for like 45 minutes because it never occurred to me that I was the beloved. That word beloved gets thrown around a lot, and I always use that to I think it refers to the divine, that other divine out there that I live. It's beloved because I live it. And then I just saw like, oh man, that's just that's my relational pattern right there. But I don't know that I'm loved. I don't feel that. And how that shows up in our awakening, our spiritual work, and our collaborations, and everything that we do. So it just touched me that question came up here. That kind of vulnerability. So it's really important to take really good care, be really really caring and gentle and sensitive to each heart, trauma informed. It's all there.
Okay, beloved, we're going to pivot to the facet of awakening,
Wait,
which
I'm the
seems to
beloved?
involve.
I'm a work in progress.
Awakening seems to involve our capacity to witness and to see through our mental constructions to the clear awareness that is always present. There seem to be a lot of eyeball metaphors like seeing and witnessing and illumination. Would it be just as correct to talk about touching or sniffing, or is there something special about the language of vision when it comes to awakening?
Yeah.
No.
Well, do you like,
Hmm?
that when you smell your breakfast on your mustache? Do you sense a boundary to the edge of the field of smell?
It is a little worrying. Drinks that have whipped cream on top, and then like an hour later, you've got rotting milk fat right under your nose. It does feel a bit separative.
That's, that's a part of me I haven't met yet.
Mm.
Mm.
It doesn't
Okay,
feel that way to
embodiment.
me.
Oh,
Yeah, it doesn't feel that way to me. You know, we're such we visually oriented creatures, you know, so I think that the visual is really important, but no, it's in every dimension of our senses. And you know, something I've noticed in my own journey is I'm a little bit more kind of somatically oriented, so I sort of sense things in the body, and through that the vision starts to change, the visual field starts to change. It's you know, I was noticing how, you know, like in some meditation instruction you keep your eyes closed, and others you keep your eyes open, you know, and the eyes open can feel confounding because it's like, well, I see a world out there and I see these, you know, these hard physical forms. How could they also be open and empty and, you know, formless in a sense? And yeah, and it's an amazing thing to through the journey of whatever the opening and the deepening is, to start to have the visual field be just equally an expression of, you know, the radiance of awareness itself, to have that kind of formlessness start to show itself to itself. Feels like it's an all sense affair.
it's very interesting to me because I'm I note that there's a kind of optical bias in our species, and yet I'm a member of our species, so I have that optical bias. My sense is that there are these other ways to do it where I could, you know, sniff my way through to the one odor, and yet I don't track as many differences in my smelling capacity as I do in my visual capacity,
Mm.
as I seem to change over time. There's very subtle things about the visual field. I'm like, oh, that's changed. I can't tell whether my sniffing has changed very well or not. I don't have as much brain tissue that can make those subtle discernments in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're opening up a whole new practice field for me too.
We're going to open the third nostril.
Well, I think the body, you know, like if we go beyond the sense of smell just to the whole field of sensation, is a territory that you can open into, you know, and there's um, maybe there's this moment of experience of feeling a sense of embodiment where we land in the body and we will relax into our own sense of presence in the body as a kind of doorway to our being, and that sense of presence in the body can extend into all the different dimensions, you know, even to feeling like the cosmos is your body, but with that same sense of like relaxing home and embodiment, not centered in the head. And I think some people probably are kind of oriented towards different senses, you know, but from a sensory feeling sense, you can feel things, you know, not just see them, give a sense. And a lot of what we experience, you know, a lot of our experience is that kind of sensory um, intuition. And yeah, this connects to the facet of embodiment. You know, as we bring awakening into embodiment, we can feel it through the body, feel pleasure in the body as bliss, pain as bliss, feel kind of the wonder, the experience of the body is beautiful and wondrous. So, but I haven't thought about sniffing, awakening through sniffing. That's a niche that's should be exploited. Maybe that's the eighth facet.
Hmm.
But it's
Well,
the
I
same
feel like
thing,
we,
really. The same thing, really. It's even sniffing. You
yeah,
know, I'm pretty sure that if you really, really opened awakened awareness into the sense of smell, that you would find the universe in there somewhere.
it's an interesting segue into the embodiment piece, which we have just covered a little bit. Because embodiment has this ambiguity, which is for all of us, it's the most primal sense. All the other senses evolve out of touch in a way.
Mm.
On the other hand, different creatures have different specializations, different humans have different specializations. I've always been very sensitive to like somatic interoception, but I know from discussions with a lot of people who've gone through a lot of transformative practices, not all of them have a sense of the lived interior of the body.
Yeah.
For them, it's often more about learning to move and use the bodies in new ways, or learning to be able to inspect and accept the body. When it comes to embodiment, I don't know. I don't really have a question here. I just wanted to presence a couple of different ways of approaching the embodiment question.
Mm. I shall begin. Is that good?
Begin.
Okay. She has commanded. Yeah, like there's a couple of ways that that we kind of work with this that think about this, and one is the kind of practice of like energetically embodying like and opening your physical, emotional, energetic system and having fluidity and openness in that. And there's a lot of ways in our own trauma and our own karma and our own, DNA, the body gets structured in a certain kind of way. Like so our everything else that we're talking about, shadow, awakening, so on, gets structured in the body in a certain way. Our bodies form defenses. So if we're have a psychological defense against something, that's also held in the body as a kind of structure. So opening up our energy, our pleasure, our life force is essential to living, in a free and awake way. But we also sometimes call this the path of incarnation. It's actually um, it's actually landing in the reality of your life, uh, in a sense, agreeing to be here, accepting to be here as you. So there's something about coming into this life. You can think of it as a dynamic process coming into this life and not just agreeing to existence, but agreeing to existence as layman in 2025 with everything that's going on and with your personal karma, with your relationships, with, like what's the culture, what's happening in the world this time in history. So there's a way in which embodiment also seems to be that process, which I think often many of us have a bit of a ambivalent relationship to being here, to actually being here and being in this moment, being in this time, being in this body, feeling the sensations of being here. And so embodiment is also that. And then to circle back to what you said, like I think often in um, in some spaces, like in some people who have a spiritual orientation, that also can come out of a trauma of being not fully embodied, not fully here. And it's one of the benefits of that trauma is that we can arrive here. We can kind of arrive here half in the spirit world and half in the human world, and bring the gift of the spirit world, but also bring the work to become fully embodied.
Mm.
That's not always the case, but I do see that.
Yeah, it's just hearing you speak to that, it evokes so many of the other facets that we've just been speaking to. And the kind of that the deeper integration of just what is in the context of our lives and how that gets lived and felt and expressed, through the body. And I also was, thinking about or kind of connecting with when we were talking about intimacy in relationships, and you asked the question about protection. It's, to express a boundary with another is to say yes to, oneself perhaps, and no to another, but it actually creates a yes to the relationship. It's a certain kind of relationality, which is, boundary creates connection in a way, or contact. So in this territory of kind of embracing what is and coming more fully into the life that's ours to live, which is only lived through the body, so much gets opened up. And it's like a little story came, which was, this was a real journey for me, was to land more fully in my own, embodiment, and to realize how much information there is available through, like this full vehicle of ourselves. And to know that I remember once I was having a conversation with someone, and all of a sudden I started to feel nervous, and I couldn't work out why I felt nervous. And then before I knew what was happening, I said something. And my body knew I was going to say it before my mind did. And so that was just this whole reorientation around what does it even mean to think, in a sense, or to have cognition. It was coming through another aspect of myself than I had, than I'd experienced before. And that has, that sort of recognition has opened up a kind of deeper embrace and a deeper curiosity about, what it means to allow a kind of knowing, not knowing, to move through, the full vehicle of who we are.
That's beautiful, because there's some ways in which the body is ground zero for all of our intelligences and relations, but there are other ways in which it's a kind of intelligent system of its own, right? Where
Yeah.
we might, like, it's your hand is trying to describe something, and if you were to just say what it's trying to describe, you might be smarter than what your mind can come up with.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, like, most of the cells in your body even aren't even human cells, and a lot of the human cells aren't even your cells. It's like there's a whole thing going on here that is its own system, that we're in relationship to, and it's the thing that we don't know anything about this world except through the body.
The the sixth aspect we'll be looking at is soul expression, which is our true will, our unique expression of the spiritual and evolutionary impulse. We could think about that as a convergence between our deep desires and capacities and the subtle prompting of the world and other people. I think there's a lot of people of whom we might say they're really living their soul expression who have no idea what they're doing. And a lot of other people who might not be doing a very good job living their soul expression while they're spending all their time trying to figure it out. So when we think of soul expression, what's the role of knowledge in that? Is it fundamentally is something a person learns about themselves that they can then act on? This is my role. This is my special gift in the world. Or is it something other than knowledge that might operate outside of their own ability to know what their soul expression is?
I like the creativity of your questions. To me, it feels like maybe it's that the path to discovery is, looks different for different people, but it seems like there's something that we're given to, in a sense, that we discover as we live our life, and as we peel away that which obscures our true nature and perhaps gets in the way of just what's ours to live and be and do. And so it does feel like it's beyond knowledge, and it's interesting to we can look in hindsight perhaps and see that unfolding path that traces all the way back to some early shaping experience in our life, but we maybe didn't know that until we're able to see it from a different vantage point.
I don't have anything to add to that. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Okay. Yeah, I love the making the knowledge retroactive is a beautiful
Yeah.
move there.
I had a teacher who once used to say, we don't know what anything means the day it happens. And I think this is really particularly true what you're saying, Abigail. What I do feel in people, and because we're working with people around this, is the longing, that's in the heart to express something, the enlightened intention that's in our awakened nature that wants to find expression somehow. And I do think, as Abigail said, that's a kind of unfolding, you know, because in use the term soul here, or enlightened attention, maybe something beyond soul, there, there's something that wants to move through us. And we often have that kind of feeling. But it's personal, but it's not fully of our making in a way, not fully of the ordinary self's making. So we can kind of follow the threads and watch it unfold and tell a story about it over time. Um, but in my experience, there's a discernment in the heart that's there to understand when we are following that or not, when we're in contact with it. I just want to add that this particular facet also, um, it also really relates to the larger social conditioning that we live in, the industrial age structures that, tell us to find our place in society and what we're supposed to do, and unearthing or what we thought our father or mother wanted us to do in the world, those kinds of things, we should be doing when we're 30 or 40 or 50 or 60, all of this kind of social conditioning and the social system as it is, the economic system as it is, when you find the thing that you want to do in the world, if it's a form of work, how you manifest that, like how there's a very practical aspect of this whole thing too, which is important to acknowledge.
Well, our
As
seventh and final aspect is the collective dimension. And I'm looking forward to us looking at different scales of that because there's, relationships and small organic groups and societies and our species and all the organisms and maybe some transpersonal collective entity that looks through all those eye holes. But the first thing really that comes up for me around this is the relationship between the inside and the outside of collectives, what the integralists would call the lower right and the lower left.
mm,
How do you guys hold this? How do you hold the collective where part of it is how do we come together to have shared meaningful experience and felt coordination? And then this other problem of how do we come together to produce actual results? How do we vote? How do we organize ourselves? What do we actually do as a collective? How are those balanced in this work?
mm. You want to take a stab at that?
Maybe just to see if I understood your question, but I heard something about like between the kind of collective meaning making and coherence, the internal coherence, and then the way that can or maybe sometimes doesn't manifest in organizing and getting something done in the world. Is that what you were pointing to?
Yes, and the opposite of that, which is sometimes people can be set up in a way that's very effective, but they can't feel or enjoy or cohere experientially together.
I see. Yeah, I'm going to sit with it for a moment and see what comes.
Mm. Well, I'll just give a stab at it. Um, this whole area, the reason that like you might think that this would be subsumed in relationship, but we find this to be a really distinct aspect of the work and a really important and profound part of the work that we do. So it has to do with not just our relationship to each other, but a relationship to being embedded in a whole. So and this is a kind of alienation from tribe, you could say, or community. That's at the heart of, I think, a lot of particularly Western experience. Um, and uh, and part of the challenge with that is we have embedded models of what it is to be in a collective. Like the work that we do is quite advanced in many ways. The kind of people that we invite into the work are that take our programs and things like that are quite experienced developmentally, and often a question when I talk to somebody about the GTC program or our work in some ways, at some point in the conversation, inevitably there's a question like, well, is this the place for me? Can will I get what I need here? Can I fit in? And which is it's a very young question. And that's often how we relate to collectives, that it's something that we fit into. And so, we work with aspects of the collectives that attend to both the interior experience and then how the collective functions together, how it can produce things. So we have, we work with how we actually do things together. We're not referring to kind of we-space practice, but merely, only that. It's a big part of what we do. But it's actually just coming into a different relationship to the experience of being self in a tribe. And part of that is having the tribe start to wake up to itself, have the collective wake up to itself. So to have it begin to develop its own awareness of its own patterns, of its own interior meaning-making sense of we, and its own exterior patterns of functioning, and to include both the full expression of the individuals in the collective and the full expression of the collective itself. So that's a kind of it's almost like there's this thing that we're calling collective that's what is both I and we are together. And we don't even have really a word for it in the English language. You could call it meta collective or something like that. But it's becoming awake to that. And then the collective, what we find is the collective can start to wake up and notice itself and have its own intelligence and begin to answer those kind of questions that you're asking. When are we losing track of the sense of cohesion? When are we losing track of our functionality, and in what ways? And both of those domains are really important for the development of any group. But the work that we're doing is a kind of collective individualism where we're supporting the collective to wake up to itself, to include both the full individuality of everyone in it and the individuality of the collective itself, letting the collective be with this particular group of individuals. That's a kind of complex answer. Abigail, can you simplify that?
Well, just pause to see if you have a response, Lynam, and I can add something for sure.
Yeah, great.
No, I love that. What do you have to add in?
Great. Yeah, this is so central to what we're up to, and I think what strikes me is just a couple of things. I mean, one is, you were referencing this, Geoff, but the collective coherence, like what cultivates that or supports that, what obscures it, and how can we lean in such that we can start to liberate some of those patterns that are, limiting individuals and also the group and its evolution. So there's that, and then there's the collective emergence, individual and collective emergence, but the collective emergence, which I think of as is the group finding its ways of engaging in life in the world, its functionality, where new futures might become possible because by virtue of the quality of the collective field and the way that the people or the group are kind of moving together, working together. And there's two things here perhaps about, like, in the context of generating transformative change, this longer program, we are really listening to what's unfolding, both at the levels of the individual but also at the collective. So GTC itself evolves with every cohort because it's a unique configuration of humans that are bringing in, their history and their ancestral lineages, and they're meeting each other in this, utterly unique configuration. And something is going to be born, but we don't know what that is. And we don't know what the kind of barriers and challenges are that we're going to have to navigate together to find that. And so it's a profound process. And also we were just talking about this. We hold it in a way that the program, if you could call it that, or the facilitation is offering practices and some framing and some structure, some containment for, to kind of initiate that process. But we're also we're in the field. We're not just outside of it. And also we're supporting the group to find its own way for the sake of kind of birthing this, this new collective and its own future. So it looks and feels, I think, oftentimes to people really different than what it means to be in a program, perhaps where you're cultivating some skills and capacities, because this is actually a very living and dynamic, unfolding or process of collective discovery of the collective kind of birthing itself and its own future. Yeah. I think there was something else, but I've forgotten.
Well, those are our 7 facets. And I know we joked about sniffing being an 8th facet, but if there was an 8th,
I wasn't joking.
Was there a principle that didn't quite make the cut that was like which would have been the 8th? Was there another viable contender?
I'm going to come back to the thing that I forgot that I wanted to say around the collective work, which
Yep.
there's just something that I like as the group finds its way with with that coherence and kind of orienting towards emergence. There can be a quality, and I know I trust that this too, Layman. There could be a quality in the collective field that is, maybe this speaks to my own soul's work in a way. It's like I am forever given to that potential, which is when it's present, which maybe we can call it a holy ground. There's a kind of healing that can happen. There's a kind of liberation of individuals and their unfoldment that is just stunning to witness. And when maybe this also circles back to what you were saying about what's beautiful in humans. It's beautiful that we can kind of co-create and then ultimately co-liberate one another through these kind of processes. And it's my felt sense that these are possibilities and capacities that the world needs in these times. Just feel so grateful to be a part of that work and to witness it occurring. Yeah. And maybe that speaks to the 8th facet, or I'm curious to see what we'll discover about about this framework that is missing. But there's a piece that we sometimes speak to, which is around culture building, and I don't know if it would be called world building, but I don't know that it needs to be its own facet, but it's kind of it's sort of maybe it's part of the milieu of the whole territory, is that we're engaging in something because it matters for those of us that have the privilege to be a part of it and participate in it, and also we're cultivating what we hope are generative, flourishing cultural patterns that that may be of service.
The Geoff, you're doubling down on sniffing as not being a joke was itself very funny. And I wonder where humor fits into these seven facets.
We play a lot. Humor is, you know, is to me, it's very important. And well, I don't know, important. It just is like to me, this is joyful. And as you know, you and I laugh a lot when we hang out. And it's lighthearted and it is really helpful. Goes a long way. But I don't get up in the morning and say, I'm going to be lighthearted today because that's going to get me further in life. I just like to laugh. It just happens. Feels really important. As does play, it's and we dance, we goof around, we do all sorts of break boundaries, explore the edges. It's we're here. We might as well have a good time. I don't know. What do you think? Where's humor? I always find like when you talk about humor, it just is kind of it's not very funny.
Or it's extra funny. It's the communicative equivalent of the straight man.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah.
So we've been at this a while. We've probably given Tucker enough for the edit, but is there anything you were hoping to get into this initial conversation that hasn't come up yet?
I mean, I would just say to kind of build on what Abigail said earlier, it's really good to exhale and just let go of all of this and come into the simplicity of being. How we experience these different dimensions uh, is very simple in a way. That was a complex view of collective work, but often it's experienced as like, oh, I can actually be myself here, and that we can have all of us here, and we're like it's like different animals from different cages in the zoo have all gotten into the same cage, and we're doing great. You get the lion and the lemur and the otter, and and that's an amazing experience. It's a homecoming, it's a homecoming, and it's what I hope for all of us collectively, is to find more openness and fluidity so that we can, create the world that we want together, to have our existence on this world be sanctifying of it, and to be adding beauty to it. And it's really clear to me that that's possible. And and this maybe adds a little seed to that.
I might read a quote that was just on my heart as we began the conversation. And we talk about we sometimes frame our work as walking each other home, and we talk about the what it means to kind of to be a mirror for each other and to cleanse the mirror that that we are. And I just came across this morning. I was working with a Navajo student in a different context, and she was talking about how their elders remind them and invite them to walk in sacred beauty. And she shared this quote, which was, or it was her own words about how the elders responded to her when she was going through a difficult time. She said Shiyazi, which means my little one. You don't need to feel down because everything you experience in this world will correct itself. It's meant to be that way because of the nature of who we are and where we come from. we're here because of everyone before us. Yeah, and I just felt so moved by that. It's from the perspective of culture, that we can remind each other of, of our inherent wholeness and support us to come home, particularly in those moments when we feel like we've somehow, done wrong or been separated from the whole. Yeah.
So next month, we're going to meet again and do a whole deep dive into the integration principle. Um, what's exciting about that? What are you looking forward to discussing when we come to a deep exploration of the integration principle?
Well, to me, this is really the territory of shadow in a way, and shadow is rich. It's the darkness is rich. It's uh, most of most of what exists is in the darkness, in our own personal darkness. So let's go explore it.
Yeah, I look forward to exploring it with you, Layman, as well. I just feel such an appreciation of the questions that you ask, and that together we'll discover something that we didn't know we needed to discover.
Me too. I'm thrilled. I'm excited. This was wonderful. I appreciate you
Mm.
both, and I'm looking forward to being both nourished and surprised by the next one.
Thank you, brother.